Today we're going to take a look at a feature in Marlin firmware that could be handy to a lot of different users, and you might not even know it exists. We're going to walk through the steps on creating custom user menus. Hello everyone, Chris here, and yes, custom user menus can be very handy for getting certain things done on your 3D printer. And nowadays, with a lot of different options for manual tool changing, this can come in really handy. Because if you want to switch to a different toolhead, you're going to have to make changes in your firmware to be able to utilize that toolhead. And if you set up different custom menu options for all those different toolheads you want to change to, you just have to navigate to it, click a button, and then you're ready to go with that new toolhead. I'm going to walk through all the steps on how to get that set up, but also I want to use this video as a refresher on setting up VS Code and Platform IO to be able to compile Marlin. I do still get a lot of questions about that, and things have changed since I did the last VS Code video, so I thought this would be a good time for a refresher. So let's take a look at this manual tool change setup first, and then we'll jump into the firmware. So this is the current setup I have. This is actually the Wham Mutant V1. It does work pretty well for my use case. They did stop selling the V1, but they're working on a new solution as we speak. But this makes it very handy to switch out to different hotends and toolheads. But if you wanted to go, let's say, from a stock hotend to a V6 to a Volcano, you're going to have different settings for your thermistor, probably different PID settings, linear advanced settings, all these things that you would have to tweak either in G-code or actually go into the firmware and set those. Well, that's where these custom menu options come in. And this isn't just for the tool changing setups. There's a lot of different things that you could build into those menu options. Pretty much anything you can configure with a G-code command, you could set it up with one of these menus. Also, with the tool change projects, there's a lot of them out there, including a lot of user-driven ones. You just have to look around, but you could use these menu options for pretty much any setup that you had. So like I said before, I did want to go over the install and setup of VS Code or Visual Studio Code. I get a lot of questions on users not being able to figure out how to compile, how to get Platform IO to work, so this is a great time just to go back through it. We are starting from scratch with an install. So I'm just going to search for Video Studio Code. The Microsoft site is actually code.visualstudio.com. I'm just going to download it for Windows. When the download's complete, we can just click on it to start the installer. You can just click next through most of this installer. It's just asking you the path, the traditional stuff that Windows installs. But this checkbox right here should be checked. This is going to add the environment path, and that makes it a lot easier to use. And we're done. We can go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code. Now, when you install it for the first time, it's going to look very similar to this. You do need to add a few things to be able to compile Marlin. The biggest one being you need an extension called Platform IO. So we'll go over here to the left, click on Extensions, and then we're just going to search Platform IO. And you want this one right here, Platform IO IDE. We'll click on it, and then we'll click on the Install button. You'll notice down here when Platform IO is installing that it's going to talk about it's installing a portable version of Python. For the most part, that's probably all you need. But it might ask for an install of Python, and we can do that as well. Once Platform IO has been successfully installed, you'll have a pop-up down here. We'll just go ahead and hit Reload. And when it's been set up successfully, you'll have a Platform IO icon right down here. Now we need a copy of Marlin firmware. And I'm just going to head to the Marlin site, marlinfw.org. We'll go to the download page. And currently, the version is at 2.0.8. So we'll just download the zip. Now we need to head to Downloads, find that zip file, right-click, and extract all. This is a step that some people miss. So make sure everything is extracted before you try to bring it into VS Code. So we'll extract all, and we're just going to call this 208, and we'll hit extract. And we have our Marlin files. We have the top level directory, and by default, because we extracted it, there is another layer. And then under that is the Marlin folder that has the configuration in it. Now, the fastest way to configure Marlin successfully so that you know it's going to compile successfully the first time, because that can be the most frustrating part, is to use a Marlin example that's already set up for you. Now, not everybody's going to be able to do this, but it is a great starting point, no matter what printer you have, just so that you know it will compile. So that's what I'm going to do here today. My Ender 3 that I'm working on has an SKR 2.0 mini board, and I know that there's an example for that. So I'm going to head back to the web. I'm going to go to the Marlin GitHub. And then if you go into config, you'll have this link. This gives you access to all the example Marlin configurations. So we'll click on that to download that zip. Again, back to downloads, and we'll extract all. And then if you open that configurations release after it's been extracted, and head into config, there's going to be an examples folder that has all these different printer manufacturers in it. No matter what printer you have, you're probably going to be able to find something that's at least close in here so that you can get started. I personally, if I didn't have a lot of experience with Marlin, I would grab one of these configs, make sure that it compiles before I started hacking and tweaking my way to get closer to the printer I actually had. So right now I'm going to select Creality. We're going to go to Ender 3. And here are all the boards that have been configured for default Ender 3. And my board is the Mini E3 2.0. So we'll head into that folder, and I'm just going to grab all 4 of these files. I'll right click and copy them. And then we're going to head back to downloads into our Marlin 2.08 folder. Then into the Marlin folder, and we're just going to paste them right here. And we're going to let it replace the default ones. So it overwrites it with a configuration that will fit our Ender 3. With that done, now we can open this up in VS Code and start to make our edits. So back to VS Code, we'll go to the Explorer up here. We're going to add folder. Downloads, Marlin 208. And we're going to go into this subfolder 2.0. If you want to be a little more organized, you can just take this folder and move it out to the main directory. It's however you want to do it. Multiple layers can get kind of confusing, so you might want to straighten this up or rename this folder. But remember, you want to add the folder to VS Code that contains the Marlin folder, not the Marlin folder. So the parent of where we are right now, and that would be this folder. If you don't see Platform IO or something doesn't look right, check this first. Make sure you have the right level of folder added to VS Code. So we'll hit Add, and up here we can expand it. We'll expand Marlin. We can see our configuration files, and another good sign that it's working correctly and you have the right folder added is now you have the PIO folder up here. So before you do anything else, you don't want to make any changes, I suggest you just compile it. So as is, let's head to the Platform IO icon. You don't need a default environment. You don't have to set any of that up if you don't want to. You can do it in the Platform INI file, but it's not necessary. You can just find your environment over here in the list. And most of the time, it's listed by what processor you have. The processor on this mini board is an STM32F103RC, and there's a specific one for Big Tree Tech that will allow you to use 512K of memory on it. The datasheet for this actually says 256. But I use this option for this board right here. And anything listed down here that has your processor, go ahead and give it a try. But if there's something specific to this board manufacturer, usually Marlin will support it and it's going to have an environment option for you. This sometimes can take a second to load. Once it's loaded, you're going to have all your options down here. You can build, upload, you can do a clean. That is important if you see errors. Remember, on an STM32 processor, most of the time you cannot upload. You're going to have to create a bin file and then use the SD card to make those changes. I'll show you more on that here in a moment. But for now, before we make any changes to the firmware, we're just going to hit build to make sure it builds successfully. Platform IO is going to go out here and download any libraries it might need to compile this, so it can take a minute. And the compile was successful. Now, when you do get errors, they can be somewhat cryptic. When it's trying to tell you what's wrong with the firmware, maybe you changed something or you just got the syntax wrong. But also, sometimes you're just going to get errors that don't make any sense, that aren't related to Marlin at all. So the first thing that I suggest you do if you're getting errors is just come over here and run a clean. That's going to clear out all the cache, everything that you had in here previously. So just in case a file got moved, something isn't quite right in your build environment, this will clean it out. Then go ahead and try another build. I've found that that will solve a lot of errors. So give that a try first. But now that we know the firmware can compile successfully, now I'm more comfortable making changes to it. Because I know it was me that did something wrong. So let's jump back to the File Explorer. Remember, most of your configuration changes are going to be done in configuration.h. For today's video, for the custom menus, they are in configuration_adv.h. And we're just going to do Control F and search. We'll search for custom. And you'll get down to the section where you configure the custom menus. Now there's a couple of different options that you have, of course. You can change up your main menu, which I don't like to do. I like to keep my main menus somewhat simple so I don't have to scroll through a lot of things. But you could do that. It works exactly the same way. It just puts it at a different level. I like to customize the configuration menu. So I have to jump down one level into configuration to get to my custom commands. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. But again, they work the same way. So I'm going to take the comment off of custom menu config. Then we're going to take the comment off of custom menu config title. This is what you want it to call it on the screen. Since we're interested in changing toolheads, let's call it toolheads. Then down here you can run a script if you would like after it's complete. M117 will just put a message on the LCD. That can be kind of handy, just so you have another confirmation that it has run. So let's just say tool changed. And you can run whatever script you would like here, but again, this will execute after you've clicked the button. Audible feedback, so it's going to beep once it's been ran. I like to take the comment off of this option because it will return you to the main screen once it's been run. That's kind of handy. You don't have to back through it. You can comment this out, do whatever you wish. I kind of like it. And then custom menu config only when idle. This is more of a safety measure. You can only issue these commands if the printer is not doing anything. So we'll just leave that. Now down here is where we actually enter what the commands are going to do. So this first one here, we're only going to do one for today. You can do as many as you like. But let's call this one Ender3 stock. And then down here is where we're going to enter all of our commands. And since I'm only doing one, I'm just going to comment out this other option. But you can add more down here as well. So let's just say you've got all kinds of different tool heads. They're all different sizes and shapes, and you have to set offsets on the printer to be able to use them. Well, for the stock one, you want to make sure that you don't have any offsets. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is reset those. So the first command, we're going to do M206, and then I'm just going to set X, Y, and Z to 0. X0, Y0, Z0. And it's going to run all of these commands that we're going to enter one after another. But you need to separate them. And to separate them, you do \n. Then we'll do our next command. Let's make sure the E steps are set correctly for the stock extruder hotend setup. So we'll do M92 space E93 because that's the stock setting. Then let's do another \n. And your PID settings from different hotend to hotend are going to be different. So you can adjust those values with this command. You would do an M301 and then enter your values. Usually you get these from something like an auto tune. But we'll do the P value 21.3. These are going to be pretty close to stock Ender 3 settings, by the way. And then right next to it, I, 1.5. And then your D setting right next to that, 76.55. Now let's set the stock acceleration values. Maybe those changed on a different tool head. Let's do \n M204, and we'll do P for printing acceleration, that's 500. Then retraction acceleration, R, 500. And then travel, 500. Let's do another command, \n. Let's say linear advance gets set up. I like to set linear advance inside the filament G code, but maybe you just want to make sure that it's not on when you flip back to a tool head. So do M900, K, 0. That'll make sure it's set to 0. And one of the most important settings, you can even add custom thermistors with commands now, using M305. There is a bit of a caveat to that. I will show you that in a moment. But we're going to do that here as well, so we can set it to that stock thermistor that's being used by the Ender 3. So one more time, \n M305. And most of the time you can get these stats from the manufacturer. A quick Google search most of the time will get you these options for these thermistor settings. The first thing we need to do is set the index. So P0. And if you're using custom most of the time, you're just going to call them 0. That's the thermistor table index. And for this thermistor, we're going to have a value of R 4700. Then a T value of 100,000. And then a B value of 4092. And there we go. We're all set with a command that will get us set up to go back to the stock hotend if we need to. So now we've made our custom configuration menu and we've set it up with one toolhead. We're almost ready to build, but to be able to use this custom thermistor setup over here, this M305, you have to make one tweak to the configuration file. So if we go to configuration.h, the main configuration file, for your thermistor, for an Ender 3, by default it's set to 1. To use those custom commands, you will have to set it to 1000. You can see that parameter right up here in the notes. But then from there on, you'll be able to configure them with that M305. Now we are ready to build one more time. So let's go to Platform IO, and we'll just hit build. And the build was successful, so we don't have any syntax problems. There are no errors. If there are errors, try to backtrack, search the items that are in the error to try to figure out what line you had a problem with. It will give you the line numbers and most of the time the configuration file. If it helps, you can go back to the Explorer and you can search all of these directories. You can just right click, find in folder, and then you can search for any error that it might give you. Now I mentioned that you can't cable up to an SMT32 most of the time and upload the firmware. You do have to hand truck it with the SD card. And the easiest way for me to do that is you just go to the PIO folder, go into build. It's going to have created a processor folder for you. This is the one we used right here. In there is your firmware.bin file. From there, right click that bin file, hit reveal in File Explorer, and then you can copy it from here and put it on your SD card. This is my SD card. I do have a firmware.current file on here already. The printer should make your bin file a .cur file after it's loaded it. You can also just rename these to .bin if you'd like to reload it again. It's just an extension change. Now, if you have problems loading your firmware on your printer with your SD card, the first thing I always recommend is you format this card, or even try a different card. But I'm going to format this one. I'm going to right click, format, and just make sure it's a FAT file system. And we'll hit start. Remember, that does delete everything on the SD card, but now we're ready to copy over our bin file. We'll just right click firmware.bin. Remember, don't change its name. It has to be firmware.bin. We'll hit copy, back to our SD card, and we'll paste it. And to load the new firmware, all we need to do is load our SD card on the board with our new firmware.bin file and power up. It does take a little bit the first time because it is loading that firmware. I upgraded versions of Marlin, so now we see Marlin 208. That's a good sign that the firmware update was successful. Now we can take a look at the screen. If we click the wheel, head into configuration, we see our new menu for toolheads right here at the top. We can click on that, and then there's our Ender 3 stock. We'll click that, you hear the audio, and then it goes back to the home screen. That's how we set it up. And it ran that M117 and said tool changed. Now all of those commands that we had on the command line were ran. Now let's jump into Pronterface so we can verify that. We'll connect up, run an M503. You can see the M305 command. That gets enabled by setting that to 1000 like I showed you. But let's just change one so that we can verify that it's actually changing. It's also important to note that when we ran this command, it did update EEPROM. So it's going to keep EEPROM in sync as well, and that will be existent over reboots. But let's just do an M92, and let's say we wanted to change something to like a BMG. Let's do E415. And then M503 again, or you can just do the M92. There's our 415. Let's jump back and run our script one more time. You can see it even gave you a little bit of output. When it ran that M301 command, it gave you the parameters that it set it to. But if you do M92 again, you can see it's returned it to 93. So our script is working. Now you can also use Pronterface to debug these scripts. Ask me how I know. But if you made a mistake out there in Marlin, it's going to complain about it here. So just for fun, I'm going to go mess this script up. So let's say we forgot to set our thermistor table index. Let's just take the P0 off. And I'm going to recompile and upload it to the printer. Now that we have a firmware version uploaded with an error in it and we're connected up to Pronterface, if we go back and run our script again, go back to Pronterface, you now have output with an error in here. Invalid index. So this can be helpful to troubleshoot if you're having problems with the command list. And that's all there is to it. This can be really handy for a lot of different things if you like to customize firmware. So there you go. Custom Marlin menus can be really handy in a lot of different scenarios, but especially when you have these manual tool change setups like the Mutant. Because it doesn't really matter what you change on the toolhead, you're going to have to change something in the firmware. And this is a really elegant solution. It's kind of a one and done. You can get it set up, then your menu items will be there waiting for you when you want to change out those toolheads. Also, I hope the VS Code walkthrough was helpful for some folks. Again, it's been a while since I've done a video on that and things have changed. So maybe this will help some of you out. Well, that's it for today. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I'll see you really soon on the next one.